What does it take for something massive, something that seems totally unbreakable, like a monarchy that's been around forever, or a huge empire, or even a famous army, to just collapse almost overnight in a single historical moment?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
We're looking at those real pivot points in history today, those, earthquake moments where the whole world order seems to just fracture.
Exactly. And today, we're doing a deep dive into four really huge historical transformations. But we're not looking at the slow, grinding decay that can take
You
generations.
know,
We're focusing on specific high-drama catalysts, moments where this confluence of things, economic problems, political decisions, sometimes even biology,
Mm.
led to these sudden, really catastrophic endings.
That's right. So our mission today is to dig into the sources covering, well, four massive events:
Hmm.
the French Revolution, the ideological combustion, then the really shocking fall of the Aztec Empire.
An incredible story.
Then the Crusades, 2 centuries of conflict shaping East and West, and finally, Waterloo,
Hmm.
that single day that just completely ended Napoleon's ambition.
And what we want to do is pull out the drama, right?
Yeah.
The surprising details, the lesser-known facts, and that delicate chain of events, sometimes just bad luck, that turns a shaky situation into a swift, often brutal conclusion.
And there are some deep paradoxes we'll get into, questions that really make you think about power.
Definitely. Like, how could a revolution that started with these really sophisticated Enlightenment ideals, liberty, equality, descend so quickly into mass terror, the guillotine?
Yeah.
Or how was this magnificent city, Tenochtitlan, home to maybe hundreds of thousands, conquered by fewer than 500 guys from overseas?
Seems impossible.
And maybe the most, I don't know, poignant irony, that climactic battle for Europe's future, Waterloo, the peak of Napoleon's career,
Mm.
critically delayed, not by some genius strategy, but by mud, just plain mud.
Incredible. So our roadmap today takes us from the volatile, hungry streets of 18th century Paris to the clash of civilizations in 16th century Mexico, then across the deserts of the Levant during the Crusades, and finally, yeah, to those soggy fields in Belgium.
It's quite a journey.
Get ready to dive deep into the moments the world really did change forever. Okay, let's start with the French Revolution. I mean, if we're talking drama, few periods can match the sheer speed at which France, the oldest, biggest, most culturally dominant kingdom in Europe, went from this absolute monarchy to, well, complete chaos. How did Louis XVI manage to lose control so fast? A system that had lasted nearly 1,000 years.
Well, you really have to look at the situation just before 1789. It was like a perfect storm brewing. Three major crises hitting all at once, particularly financially.
Right.
The financial situation was, frankly, catastrophic. France had poured money into supporting the American Revolution, which, felt good politically, sticking it to the British,
Sure.
but it absolutely bankrupted the royal treasury. Louis VI inherited a nation just drowning in debt. And the cost of just paying the interest on that debt was eating up a huge chunk of the government's money every year.
And the way they raised money, the tax system, it was fundamentally broken, wasn't it? The sources are pretty clear on this.
Oh, completely.
It was deeply unfair. The first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility, they were basically exempt from almost all direct taxes.
Hmm?
So the entire burden, things like the tail, the land tax, or the hated gabelle, the salt tax, it fell almost entirely on the third estate.
Because 98% of the population,
Yeah.
the ordinary people, the merchants, the peasants, they carry the whole load.
98%.
And then the third crisis, one that really pushed the Parisian masses over the edge, was just hunger.
Simple starvation.
Yeah, a series of really bad harvests in the late 1780s just devastated the grain supply. So the price of bread, which was the absolute staple food for city workers, it skyrocketed to unbelievable levels.
The sources say, what was it? Up to 90% of a worker's daily wage.
Exactly, up to 90%. Just to buy enough bread to feed their family for the day. When basic survival costs that much, well, the political system's already on life support, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then you mix that visceral day-to-day hunger with the ideas floating around from the Enlightenment.
That's the spark.
Right. Thinkers like Rousseau, Montesquieu, they'd spent decades questioning the whole idea of the divine right of kings. They were putting forward these radical new concepts: popular sovereignty, the social contract, natural rights.
So the intellectual justification for overthrowing the king wasn't just there, it was being actively talked about. In the salons, the coffee houses in Paris, the groundwork was laid.
Which brings us to the political breakdown. Louis XVI, He's backed into a corner financially. He's forced, very reluctantly, to call the Estates General in May 1789.
And this body hadn't met since 1614.
Incredible, 175 years.
A medieval representative assembly basically dusted off because the king was out of options.
So it finally meets after all that time. How quickly did things unravel for the king then?
Oh, almost instantly. The sources show it wasn't about finding a compromise. It was a power struggle from day one. The Third Estate, representing that huge majority, they demanded fair voting.
Meaning one person, one vote.
Yeah, voting by head, not by a state.
Yeah.
Because traditionally, the clergy and nobility could always outvote the commoners 2-1, even though they represented tiny fractions of the population.
And the king refused.
Of course. Agreeing to that would have immediately dismantled the entire traditional power structure of France. He couldn't do it.
So in response, the Third Estate representatives basically staged a political coup, didn't they?
They did. They walked out, declared themselves the National Assembly, and famously met on a nearby tennis court.
The tennis court oath, June 1789.
And they swore they wouldn't disband until they had written a constitution for France. They were essentially saying sovereignty didn't lie with the king anymore. It lay with the people, represented by them. This wasn't just a protest, it was a formal declaration of a new political reality.
And that political move quickly connected with action and maybe fear on the streets?
Absolutely. The symbolic moment, the one everyone remembers as the start of the revolution, is the storming of the Bastille. July 14th, 1789. Parisians were terrified that royal troops were gathering to shut down the new assembly. They were desperate for weapons, for gunpowder. So they attacked the Bastille prison, this hated symbol of royal tyranny.
And its fall wasn't just about releasing prisoners, was it?
No, it was huge. Symbolically, it ignited this wave of revolutionary feeling across the whole country. It terrified the aristocracy and showed that the people were willing to use force.
The pace of change then just becomes breathtaking.
It really does. In August, just weeks later, the National Assembly holds this dramatic overnight session and formally abolishes feudalism.
Just like that, centuries of tradition gone.
Gone, swept away, noble privileges, special legal status, tithes to the church all abolished. And then soon after, they issue the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen,
The foundational document.
laying out liberty, equality, popular sovereignty, property rights. It's an astonishingly fast transformation from an absolute monarchy to a state based on natural rights. Weeks, really.
But here's that paradox you mentioned earlier. How do we get from these incredibly lofty ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, to the reign of terror and the guillotine? What turns it so dark?
I think the crucial turning point, according to the sources, was the king's attempt to flee the country in June 1791.
Right, the flight to Varennes.
Exactly. He and his family tried to escape, basically heading for the Austrian border, where they hoped to rally support from other monarchs. But they were caught, recognized near the border, and dragged back to Paris in disgrace.
And that changed everything.
It shattered any lingering public trust. He wasn't just seen as maybe incompetent anymore. Now he looked like a traitor, actively working with France's enemies against his own people and the revolution.
And then foreign powers actually did intervene.
Yes, Austria and Prussia declared war in 1792, stating their goal was to restore the French monarchy. That intervention basically killed the moderate phase of the revolution overnight. It radicalized everything. Suddenly, any opposition to the revolution, even moderate dissent, could be painted as treason, as siding with the enemy invaders. The stakes became life and death.
Which led directly to
The abolition of the monarchy in September 1792. France was declared a republic. And then, the really shocking step, the trial and execution of King Louis VI in January 1793.
That must have sent shockwaves across Europe.
Oh, absolutely. It was a thunderclap. It horrified every royal court. It confirmed their worst fears about this radical new French state and galvanized opposition.
And that execution marks the beginning of the most extreme phase, right? The Reign of Terror.
Yes, from roughly 1793 to 1794. The radical Jacobin faction, led by this intense, uncompromising figure, Maximilien Robespierre, effectively seized control through the Committee of Public Safety.
And they ruled in the name of?
Virtue, revolutionary purity. They genuinely believed, it seems, that to save the revolution from its internal and external enemies, they had to be utterly ruthless. They instituted what was essentially a dictatorship.
This wasn't just mob rule, though. It was organized.
Very much so. It was state-sponsored terror. The sources talk about the mechanisms, the lot of suspects, which made it terrifyingly easy to arrest anyone, even vaguely deemed an enemy of liberty.
Who are the targets?
Initially, obvious royalists and counter-revolutionaries, but increasingly it turned inwards. Queen Marie Antoinette was executed, and then former revolutionaries, people who had been heroes just months before, but were now seen as too moderate, or rivals to Robespierre. Tens of thousands were executed, often after brief trials by revolutionary tribunals.
What's really striking, almost disturbing, is how far they tried to push the transformation. It wasn't just politics.
No, they aimed for a total societal overhaul. They launched a fierce campaign against the Catholic Church, trying to de-Christianize France. They replaced it with this secular cult of reason, then later the cult of the supreme being.
And the calendar change you mentioned.
Right. They scrapped the Gregorian calendar with all its Christian and royalist associations and introduced a new, supposedly rational decimal calendar. New month names based on nature, 10-day weeks. It was an attempt to literally remake time itself to erase the past.
It sounds like revolutionary fervor gone completely off the rails.
It's maybe the ultimate example of revolutionary overreach. And inevitably, the terror started to consume its own creators.
How did it end?
Because the definition of enemy and impure kept shifting and narrowing. Eventually, Robespierre's own allies and rivals in the government realized they could be next on his list. They turned on him. He was arrested in July 1794, tried and executed by the very system he had championed.
So the terror ends quite suddenly.
Yes, with Robespierre's fall, the most violent phase ends abruptly.
So looking back, the legacy is huge, isn't it? The revolution permanently destroyed the old feudal system in France, got rid of noble privilege, promoted the idea of meritocracy.
Absolutely. Those are massive, lasting changes.
But it also left this chilling legacy. A stark warning about how quickly movements based on high ideals can descend into paranoia, self-destruction, violence, and dictatorship.
A very powerful and often repeated historical lesson.
Okay, let's pivot now. We're jumping back almost 300 years and across the Atlantic to a completely different kind of collapse, the fall of the Aztec Empire. This story is just incredible, massive, architectural grandeur meets ruthless strategy, and then biology plays a devastating role.
It really is one of history's most dramatic and, frankly, unlikely conquests. We should start with the city itself, Tenochtitlan.
The Aztec capital.
Right. Founded by the Mexica people, who we generally call the Aztecs, around 1325. They built it on an island in Lake Texcoco, supposedly after seeing this prophetic sign, an eagle on a cactus eating a serpent.
Which is still on the Mexican flag today.
Exactly. And from that base, through alliances, particularly the Triple Alliance formed in 1428, they built this huge empire over about 90 years. It stretched across much of modern-day Mexico, controlling millions of people.
And Tenochtitlan itself, the descriptions are just stunning.
It was an absolute marvel, far larger than most major European cities. At the time, maybe 200,000 people. Some estimates go even higher, and arguably cleaner and better organized.
Built on islands, right? Connected by causeways.
Yeah, huge stone causeways linking it to the mainland. It had towering temple pyramids like the Temple of Mare, palaces, bustling marketplaces, and sophisticated aqueducts bringing fresh water from the mainland.
And didn't they have those floating gardens?
The chinampas. Yeah, that's a fascinating detail. They weren't really floating, but these incredibly ingenious artificial islands built up from the lake bed. Super fertile, allowing for multiple harvests a year. It was this sophisticated, engineered agricultural system that fed the massive city population.
So when the first Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, they must have been just awestruck.
Completely. The sources, like Bernal Diaz del Castillo's account, describe them being stunned. Comparing to Venice or Constantinople, the greatest cities they knew, they couldn't believe what they were seeing.
Yet, beneath all this splendor, there was something darker, right? The sources emphasize the role of warfare and religion.
Absolutely central. The Aztec worldview was based on a belief that they were living in the fifth and final age of the world. And their sun god, Huitzilopochtli, needed constant nourishment to keep the sun rising each day.
And that nourishment was human blood.
Human blood and hearts. They believed constant human sacrifice was essential to literally keep the universe going. Thousands of people were sacrificed each year, often captives taken in warfare. Hearts cut out while still beating, bodies thrown down the temple steps. It was a core part of their state religion and cosmology.
Which meant warfare wasn't just about conquest.
Not entirely. They fought what were called flower wars, specifically to capture prisoners for sacrifice. It was a religious imperative as much as a military one.
And this points to a key weakness, doesn't it? The sources suggest the empire wasn't exactly unified.
Not at all. That's the crucial vulnerability. Under Emperor Moctezuma II, who ruled when the Spanish arrived, the empire was powerful, but highly centralized. And it faced deep, simmering resentment from the peoples they had conquered.
Why the resentment?
These subjugated groups had to pay heavy tribute goods, food, labor. And, maybe most bitterly, they were often the source of the victims for those mass sacrifices in Tenochtitlan. Peoples like the Tlaxcalans, for example, absolutely hated Aztec rule. So it wasn't a cohesive empire. It was more like a collection of resentful states held together by Aztec military power and fear.
Enter Hernan Cortez in 1519.
Exactly. And he arrives with this absurdly small force. The numbers are just startling. About 500 soldiers, maybe 16 horses, a few small cannons.
How on earth do you conquer an empire with that?
Well, Cortez wasn't just a soldier. He was a brilliant and utterly ruthless political strategist. He very quickly sized up the situation. He saw the fractures, the deep hatred for the Aztecs among their subjects.
And he exploited it.
Masterfully. His key move was forging alliances. He convinced subjugated groups, especially the Tlaxcalans, to join him against the Aztecs. Suddenly, it wasn't 500 Spaniards versus millions. It was 500 Spaniards leading a massive indigenous army, thousands strong, who were eager for revenge. He basically turned it into a huge civil war, with himself directing the anti-Aztec side.
So when they finally reached Tenochtitlan, what happened? How did they even get inside?
This is where Moctezuma's role becomes really debated and crucial. He seems to have been paralyzed by indecision. Some sources suggest he might have believed Cortez was somehow connected to the legend of Quetzalcoatl, a god prophesied to return from the east.
So he let them in.
He allowed Cortez and his men to enter the city peacefully. A catastrophic mistake in hindsight. It gave the Spaniards a foothold right in the heart of the empire.
And they didn't waste time, did they?
No. They quickly seized the opportunity, taking Moctezuma himself hostage within his own palace. They effectively started ruling the city through him, issuing orders in his name.
But that couldn't last. When did it explode?
While Cortez was temporarily away dealing with another Spanish rival on the coast, his lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, got nervous. Fearing an Aztec plot during a major religious festival, Alvarado ordered a massacre of unarmed Aztec nobles and priests.
That must have been the final straw.
It ignited the city. The Aztecs rose up in absolute fury. Moctezuma was killed during the uprising. The Spanish claimed the Aztecs stoned him. Aztec accounts differ. The Spaniards were besieged in their quarters.
Leading to the famous escape attempt.
Yes, the No Treats Day, the Night of Sorrows. The Spaniards tried to sneak out of the city at night, laden with gold and treasure they'd looted, but they were discovered.
What happened?
Chaos. Attacked from all sides on the narrow causeways, Aztec warriors swarming them from canoes on the lake. Many Spaniards, weighed down by gold, fell off the causeways and drowned. Cortez lost hundreds of his men, maybe half his force and most of his treasure that night. It was a total disaster for them.
But incredibly, he didn't give up.
No, Cortez was relentless. He retreated back to the territory of his Tlaxcalan allies, regrouped, gathered more indigenous support, and planned his return.
This time, it wasn't about getting inside peacefully.
No, this time it was war, a brutal siege. He came back in 1521 to systematically destroy Tenochtitlan. He had ships built on the lake to control the water, cut off the causeways, bringing food and fresh water into the city. He laid siege for 93 days.
And the Aztecs fought back fiercely under a new emperor.
Yes, Cuauhtémoc led a desperate, brave defense of the starving city. But there was another enemy they couldn't fight.
Disease.
Smallpox. This is the really devastating non-military factor. Sometime before or during the siege, smallpox, introduced by the Europeans, swept through Tenochtitlan.
And the Aztecs had no immunity.
None whatsoever. It was catastrophic. Tens of thousands died, maybe more. It killed the previous emperor, Cuitlahuac, weakened the defenders, crippled their leadership, and caused mass panic. It was arguably more devastating than any weapon the Spanish had.
The psychological impact must have been immense, too, seeing this invisible killer sweep through.
Unimaginable. So you have starvation, constant attacks, the city being destroyed block by block, and this horrific epidemic raging. Cuauhtémoc fought on, but the end was inevitable.
When did the city finally fall?
He was captured trying to escape in a canoe on August 13, 1521. With his capture, resistance collapsed.
And the city itself?
Utterly destroyed, razed to the ground. The Spanish dismantled the temples and palaces and used the stones to build their own capital, Mexico City, right on top of the ruins. A complete and irreversible end. A combination of brilliant, ruthless strategy, exploiting internal divisions, technological advantages like steel and horses, and crucially, that devastating biological weapon they didn't even understand they were deploying.
A true historical earthquake. Okay, let's shift gears again. We're moving forward in time, but also looking at a conflict that spanned centuries and continents. The Crusades. This wasn't a sudden collapse like the Aztecs, but rather a prolonged series of conflicts. Started with religious fervor, maybe, but quickly got tangled up in politics, economics, and immense violence.
That's a good way to put it. It really all kicks off in 1095. Pope Urban II gives this incredibly influential sermon at the Council of Clermont in France.
What was the main call to action?
He called on the knights and people of Western Europe to march east and liberate Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslim control. He was responding in part to an appeal for help from the Byzantine Emperor, Alexios I.
The Eastern Roman Empire.
Yes, based in Constantinople. They were feeling pressured by the expansion of the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia, what's now Turkey.
But Pope Urban's motives were, well, complex. It wasn't just about helping Byzantium.
What else was going on? A source has mentioned a few things. Well, asserting papal authority across Europe was definitely a big one. The Pope wanted to show he could command kings and nobles. He was also likely hoping to potentially heal the Great Schism, the split between the Western Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church that had happened in 1054.
Bringing the churches back together under Rome.
That was probably part of the ambition. And critically, he saw a way to deal with a major problem within Europe: the constant disruptive violence of feudal knights.
Redirecting their aggression outward.
Exactly. Channeling all that knightly fighting energy away from local European conflicts and towards a common holy enemy. And the incentive he offered was incredibly powerful.
Salvation.
A plenary indulgence. Forgiveness of all past sins for anyone who undertook the journey and fought or died trying to liberate Jerusalem. They called it taking up the cross. Crux in Latin, hence crusade.
So who answered the call? Was it just knights?
Oh no, the response was overwhelming and incredibly diverse. You had powerful dukes and counts, knights looking for land and glory, younger sons with no inheritance prospects back home. But also thousands of ordinary people, peasants driven by genuine religious faith, the promise of salvation, maybe escaping hardship or legal troubles. It was this potent mix of faith, greed, ambition, and adventure.
And the First Crusade, surprisingly, it actually worked.
Against all odds, yes. It was incredibly difficult logistically. They faced starvation, disease, internal squabbles, long marches through hostile territory. But somehow, these disparate armies managed to reach the Levant.
And they captured Jerusalem.
They did, on July 15, 1099, after a brutal siege.
But the sources are very clear that this victory was immediately followed by something horrific.
Yes, the capture of Jerusalem culminated in an appalling massacre. The Crusaders, in a frenzy of religious zeal and pent-up aggression, slaughtered thousands of the city's inhabitants, Muslims and Jews alike, men, women, children.
Why? What was the justification?
In their minds, they were enacting God's vengeance, cleansing the holy city. But the accounts, even from Crusader chronicles, describe streets running with blood. It was an act of extreme violence that created a legacy of bitterness that lasted centuries.
So after this violent beginning, they established states there.
Yes, they set up European-style feudal states, known as the Crusader states or Outremer, across the sea. The most important was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Others included the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa.
How did these European outposts survive in a hostile region?
It was precarious. They relied on a couple things. Firstly, a constant, though often difficult trickle of reinforcements and supplies from Europe. Secondly, these unique institutions, the military religious orders.
The Templars and Hospitallers?
Exactly. Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, orders of monks who were also elite, heavily armed knights. They garrisoned castles, protected pilgrims, and formed the backbone of the Crusader state's military power. They also built incredible fortifications, like the massive castle Crac des Chevaliers in Syria, which still stands today.
But ultimately, these states were vulnerable, weren't they?
Fundamentally, they were always islands in a much larger sea of Muslim power. They were outnumbered, far from their European power base, and often plagued by internal rivalries. The tide was always likely to turn against them eventually.
And the turning point came with Saladin.
Yes, Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West as Saladin, a brilliant Kurdish general who managed to do what the Muslim world hadn't done for decades, unite Egypt and Syria under his rule. He created a powerful, unified state surrounding the Crusader kingdoms.
And he took them on directly.
He did. He inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the main Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin in 1187. It was a devastating loss for the Kingdom of Jerusalem.
Which led to the fall of Jerusalem again.
Yes. After Hattin, Saladin systematically rolled back the Crusader games. He recaptured Jerusalem in October 1187, less than 90 years after the First Crusade took it.
But the sources note a significant difference in how Saladin handled the city's capture compared to 1099.
A huge difference. It's really striking. Unlike the Crusader massacre, Saladin showed remarkable clemency and political savvy. He negotiated terms. Most Christian inhabitants were allowed to ransom themselves and leave peacefully. He protected holy sites.
Why the difference?
Partly chivalry, partly pragmatic politics. He wanted the city intact, and he wanted to avoid provoking an even larger European backlash. His conduct cemented his reputation, even among Europeans, as a noble and honorable adversary, in stark contrast to the brutality of the First Crusades leaders.
Despite losing Jerusalem, the Crusades continued, didn't they? But did the original ideal survive?
Not really. Later Crusades became increasingly diverted by politics and economics. The most notorious example, the one that really shows how distorted the idea became, is the Fourth Crusade.
What happened there?
It's a grim story. Launched around 1202, the Crusaders contracted with Venice to transport them to Egypt, which was now seen as the key to retaking Jerusalem. But they couldn't pay the Venetians the full amount.
So the Venetians had leverage.
Huge leverage. They basically manipulated the crusade for their own commercial and political aims. First, they got the Crusaders to attack a rival Christian port city, Zara. Then, through a complex series of political maneuvers involving a deposed Byzantine prince, they diverted the entire crusade to Constantinople.
The capital of the Eastern Christian Empire they were originally supposed to help.
Exactly. The irony is staggering. Instead of fighting Muslims in the Holy Land, the Fourth Crusade ended up besieging, capturing, and brutally sacking Constantinople, at the largest and wealthiest Christian city in the world, in 1204.
They attacked fellow Christians.
Yes. Massacred people, looted churches, stole priceless relics and treasures, many of which ended up in Venice. It was an act of unbelievable political cynicism and greed disguised as a crusade. It fatally weakened the Byzantine Empire and permanently poisoned relations between Western and Eastern Christianity.
So the Crusader states in the Holy Land were ultimately doomed.
Pretty much. Despite later crusades, including ones led by famous kings like Richard the Lionheart or Louis IX of France, they couldn't overcome the fundamental strategic disadvantages. Muslim powers, particularly the powerful Mamluk Sultanate based in Egypt, gradually reconquered the remaining territories.
When did the last foothold fall?
The city of Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold on the mainland, fell to the Mamluks in 1291. That effectively marked the end of the Crusader presence in the Levant after nearly 200 years of conflict.
So militarily, a failure in the long run. But were there other consequences? The sources mention cultural exchange.
Yes, that's an important, if often overlooked, aspect. The prolonged contact, even though hostile, did intensify cultural exchange. Europeans were exposed to Islamic learning mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, ancient Greek texts preserved in Arabic. They also learned about new goods, trade routes, and technologies.
But the overall legacy, especially in terms of religious relations,
That's much darker. The sources are quite explicit about this. They say the Crusades left a bitter legacy of religious animosity between Christianity and Islam, and also between Western and Eastern Christianity because of the Fourth Crusade.
and this history still resonates today.
Very much so. The memory of the Crusades often, as the sources say, through highly distorted and politicized interpretations, is still invoked by various groups on different sides to justify modern conflicts or grievances. It's used as a historical wound, a symbol of past aggression or victimization.
So the collapse wasn't just political or military, but also a collapse of understanding, leaving scars that haven't fully healed.
That's a powerful way to think about it, yes. The enduring bitterness is perhaps the longest-lasting consequence.
Right. For our final historical earthquake, we're zooming in, not centuries, not years, but a single incredibly intense day. June 18th, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. This is the final act for Napoleon Bonaparte, maybe the most dominant military figure Europe had ever seen. His empire collapses not over decades, but in about 12 hours.
It's the ultimate high-stakes showdown. The context is crucial. Napoleon had escaped from his first exile on the island of Elba. This period is called the 100 Days.
His return must have terrified the other European powers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
They immediately declared him an outlaw, not even legitimate ruler, but basically a threat to peace, and mobilized massive armies to crush him once and for all. They knew this was it. This battle would decide the fate of Europe for generations.
So who are the main players on the field?
You had Napoleon commanding the French Imperial Army, mostly veterans, around 72,000 strong. Facing him was the Duke of Wellington, leading an Anglo-Allied army, a mix of British, Dutch, Belgian, and German troops, about 68,000.
Roughly equal forces.
On paper, yes, But Wellington's army was more diverse, maybe less uniformly experienced than Napoleon's core troops. But there was a critical third player, the Prussian army, led by the old, fiery Field Marshal Blucher. About 50,000 Prussians were marching hard to join Wellington, having been defeated by Napoleon 2 days earlier, but crucially, not destroyed. Their arrival would be decisive.
Okay, so the stage is set, three huge armies converging. Then comes this surprising fact, this almost bizarre detail that had huge consequences.
The mud.
Right. The battle didn't start first thing in the morning as planned.
No. There had been torrential rain the night before and into the morning. The ground was completely waterlogged, like a swamp in places.
And why did that matter so much to Napoleon?
Because Napoleon's classic tactic relied heavily on his artillery. He loved to use massed cannon fire, his grand battery, to blast holes in the enemy line before sending in his infantry and cavalry. But in that mud, the cannons couldn't maneuver easily.
Yeah.
Worse, the cannonballs wouldn't ricochet effectively. They'd just sink into the soggy ground with a thud.
So he waited.
He felt he had to. He delayed the start of his main attack until around 11:30 a.m., waiting for the ground to dry out just enough for his guns to be effective. A fatal delay, as it turned out.
And Wellington used that time.
Wellington was a master of defensive warfare. He used every minute. His key strategic decision was positioning his main infantry line on the reverse slope of the Mont Saint-Jean ridge.
What does that mean, reverse slope?
Instead of putting them right on the crest, visible to the enemy, he placed them just behind it, on the side sloping away from the French. This gave them crucial protection.
How so?
Most of the French cannonballs would fly over their heads or hit the crest of the ridge instead of plowing directly into his infantry ranks. It minimized the devastating effect of Napoleon's artillery, forcing the French to make costly uphill attacks against relatively fresh defenders.
So the battle kicks off late morning. What were the key areas of fighting?
It became this brutal contest of attrition, focused on a few key strong points Wellington held in front of his main line. Two farms became legendary, Hougoumont on Wellington's right flank and La Haye-Sainte in the center.
What happened there?
Vicious, desperate fighting all day. Napoleon threw thousands of troops at these positions, trying to break through or draw Wellington's reserves away. Hougoumont in particular saw relentless French assaults repelled by British guards and German troops in incredibly fierce, close-quarters combat. It became a battle within the battle.
And Napoleon also tried his cavalry. The sources mention those famous charges.
Oh yes. Led by Marshal Ney, perhaps unwisely and without proper infantry support, the French launched massive cavalry charges against Wellington's center. Thousands of armored cuirassiers and lancers thundered up the slope. Magnificent, but ultimately futile.
Why futile? How did Wellington stop them?
His infantry formed squares. This was the classic anti-cavalry tactic. The men stood shoulder to shoulder, 4 ranks deep, presenting a wall of bayonets on all sides. Horses won't charge into a solid hedge of bayonets.
So the cavalry just swirled around them.
Exactly. The sources describe this incredible scene. Waves of French horsemen surging around these immovable British and Allied squares, unable to break them, taking heavy casualties from musket fire, eventually having to retreat exhausted and demoralized. It was disciplined infantry triumphing over unsupported cavalry.
So late afternoon, the battle is still raging. Neither side is broken. What's Napoleon's next move?
He's running out of time. He knows the Prussians are coming. He can hear their guns getting closer on his right flank. He decides to gamble everything on one final decisive blow. He commits his last reserve. The Imperial Guard.
The elite of the elite.
His legendary veterans. The Old Guard, the Middle Guard. These guys had marched all over Europe. They were symbols of French glory, and crucially, they had never been decisively beaten in open battle when Napoleon himself commanded them. He sent them marching straight up the slope towards the center of Wellington's line, expecting them to finally smash through.
The decisive moment.
Absolutely. The suspense must have been unbearable. If the Guard broke through, Wellington's line would likely collapse, and Napoleon could potentially snatch victory even with the Prussians arriving.
But they didn't break through.
No. Wellington was ready. He had concealed lines of his best British infantry, many lying down behind the ridge crest to minimize casualties from the preparatory bombardment. As the Guard columns reached the top, Wellington supposedly gave the order. "Now, Maitland, now's your time." The British Guard stood up and delivered devastating, point-blank volleys of musket fire right into the faces of the advancing Imperial Guard columns. The effect was shattering.
The Guard actually stopped.
They faltered. And then, crucially, they started to fall back, disordered. For the first time, the rest of the French army saw the unthinkable. The Imperial Guard was retreating.
What was the impact of that?
Psychologically devastating. The cry went up, La Garde recule. The Guard recoils. It shattered the morale of the entire French army almost instantly. If the Guard couldn't do it, nobody could. Panic started to spread like wildfire.
And at the same time,
Blucher's Prussians finally arrived in force on Napoleon's right flank. They had been marching relentlessly all day, overcoming difficult terrain and French blocking forces. Now they slammed into the French flank with fresh troops just as the Guard was retreating and panic was setting in. It was the final, decisive blow.
a total collapse.
Complete rout. The French army just dissolved into chaos in the gathering dusk, fleeing the battlefield, pursued mercilessly by the Prussians throughout the night.
The cost must have been horrific.
Appalling. Casualties were enormous on all sides. Maybe 25,000 French killed or wounded, around 15,000 for Wellington's army, and another 7,000 Prussians. A bloodbath concentrated into a few square miles over a single afternoon.
And the consequences for Napoleon.
Irreversible. He fled back to Paris, abdicated for the second and final time just 4 days later. The Allies exiled him to the remote South Atlantic island of St. Helena, where he died 6 years later. Waterloo was the definitive end of his career and his empire.
And the broader significance.
It ushered in a new era. It confirmed British dominance in European and global affairs for the next century. It led to the Congress of Vienna redrawing the map of Europe and establishing the Concert of Europe, a system designed to maintain peace and stability, which, despite flaws, largely held, preventing another continent-wide war for almost 100 years, until World War I. All decided on that muddy field in Belgium. A single day defined by Wellington's brilliant defensive tactics, Blucher's dogged determination to reach the battlefield, and Napoleon's uncharacteristic tactical errors and that crucial delay caused by the rain. So, looking back across these four incredible stories, the Revolution in Paris, the fall of Tenochtitlan, the centuries of Crusades ending at Acre, and Napoleon's final gamble at Waterloo, we can definitely see some common threads, can't we?
Yeah.
Factors that seem to precipitate these sudden dramatic collapses.
Yeah, absolutely. The first one that really jumps out is some kind of underlying strategic vulnerability, like the Aztec Empire being so totally dependent on its single capital. Once Tenochtitlan fell, the whole thing just imploded.
Right. Or the French monarchy's financial system. It was just fundamentally broken, unsustainable. It was like a ticking time bomb, just waiting for something like the bread crisis to set it off.
And even Napoleon at Waterloo.
Yeah.
His whole plan relied on a quick victory before the Prussians arrived in force. That reliance on a single high-stakes outcome with no real backup plan made him incredibly vulnerable when things went wrong, like the delay.
That's a great point. The second thread seems to be the impact of external force multipliers. Things that come from outside the immediate conflict, but dramatically shift the balance.
Like the Enlightenment ideas fueling the French Revolution, providing the intellectual framework for tearing down the old order.
Exactly. Or Blucher's Prussians arriving just at the critical moment at Waterloo that external reinforcement was decisive. But maybe the most dramatic example is smallpox in Mexico.
Yeah.
A biological force, completely external to the military or political situation, that just ravaged the Aztec defenders. An invisible WMD, essentially, that they had no defense against.
And the third thread, maybe ideological contradiction, where the actions taken completely undermine the stated goals or beliefs.
I think that's definitely there. Look at the French Revolution again, starting with these amazing ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity.
And ending in the reign of terror, the state turning brutally on its own citizens in the name of revolutionary purity. It's a total contradiction.
Or the Crusades, driven, at least initially, by intense religious devotion and the goal of liberating holy sites.
But so often marked by horrific violence, political maneuvering, greed, culminating in the Fourth Crusade sacking Constantinople, a Christian city, for money and power. The actions completely betrayed the supposed ideals.
So these events, they really show us that history isn't always a slow, steady process, is it?
Not at all. It seems defined by these critical moments, these flashpoints, where all these forces, political, economic, technological, biological, ideological, just converge, and suddenly the way things were becomes irreversible. The illusion of permanence just shatters.
You see how empires, monarchies, power structures that seem invincible can fall, not just through slow decay over generations, but in these moments of intense drama. A single siege, one decisive battle, a sudden wave of revolutionary or religious frenzy.
We've seen brilliant planning, like Cortés alliances or Wellington's defense, and we've seen what looks like just terrible luck or fatal errors.
Mm,
A king not grasping the danger of hunger, an emperor paralyzed by a prophecy, a military genius forced to wait for mud to dry.
yeah.
So this leaves you, our listener, with something to think about. A final question, really sparked by these sources. Given how complex these collapses are, this intricate mix of factors needed the perfect storm of, say, disease plus political resentment plus financial ruin plus timely reinforcements. How much of history's dramatic turns are actually guided by deliberate, purposeful planning, and how much is maybe just dictated by chance, by a critical, catastrophic moment of sheer bad luck, or one uncharacteristic, fatal mistake? Something to ponder as you reflect on just how fragile even the mightiest structures can be.